What if the most powerful military on Earth is facing a battlefield where its greatest strength may not be enough? For decades, the United States built a military designed around one simple idea: find the enemy, reach the enemy, destroy the enemy. But what happens when the battlefield is no longer a place that can be conquered with firepower alone? What happens when the real fight is not about destroying weapons, but about controlling uncertainty? Because the conflict unfolding around Iran and the Strait of Hormuz reveals something much bigger than one confrontation between two countries. It reveals a new challenge for modern warfare. A challenge where aircraft, missiles, ships, drones, energy markets, and political pressure all collide in the same battlefield. And at the center of this entire struggle is not a fighter jet, not a missile, not even a military base. It is a narrow strip of water, only a few dozen miles wide. The Strait of Hormuz, a geographic feature that looks almost insignificant on a satellite map. A thin blue line between Iran and Oman. But that thin line connects some of the most important energy routes on Earth. And the question surrounding it is becoming one of the defining questions of 21st century warfare. Can a superpower control a battlefield that it cannot simply destroy? Because the Strait of Hormuz represents a contradiction at the heart of modern military power. The United States possesses unmatched aircraft, advanced intelligence systems, powerful naval forces, and some of the most sophisticated weapons ever created. But here's the problem. Military superiority does not always create strategic control. A country can dominate the skies and still struggle to control what happens on the ground. It can destroy missile launchers and still fail to eliminate the ability to threaten shipping. It can win individual battles while facing a much harder question. Can it shape the behavior of its opponent? That is where the story of the Strait of Hormuz becomes bigger than Iran. Because this is not simply a story about missiles being launched and ships being attacked. This is a story about how warfare is changing. On a global map, the Strait of Hormuz almost disappears. It is a narrow waterway connecting the Persian Gulf to the Arabian Sea. At its narrowest point, it is only around 21 nautical miles wide. The shipping lanes themselves are even more restricted. But every day, enormous amounts of energy move through this passage. Oil tankers, natural gas carriers, commercial ships carrying the resources that power modern economies. For countries thousands of miles away, this narrow waterway affects fuel prices, transportation costs, inflation, and economic stability. The first contradiction appears immediately. The Strait of Hormuz is physically small, but strategically, it is enormous. The part most people miss is that geography can sometimes defeat technology. A country may have the world's most advanced weapons, but it cannot move a coastline. It cannot relocate a shipping lane. It cannot eliminate the importance of geography. And that is why this waterway has remained one of the most strategically important locations on Earth. Because whoever influences the Strait of Hormuz does not just influence a battlefield. They influence the global economy. The modern struggle around the Strait of Hormuz did not appear overnight. For decades, Iran and the United States have competed for influence across the Middle East. The rivalry has involved nuclear negotiations, sanctions, proxy conflicts, naval confrontations, and military pressure. But the reason Hormuz remains so dangerous is because it creates a unique strategic problem. Iran does not need to defeat the United States in a traditional military confrontation. It does not need to destroy American aircraft carriers. It does not need to match American air power aircraft minus for minus aircraft. Instead, it can attempt to create uncertainty. And uncertainty is one of the most powerful weapons in modern conflict. Imagine an anchor captain approaching the Strait of Hormuz. The ship is not entering a traditional battlefield. There may be no visible front line, no army formation, no obvious enemy. But there is a question. Is this water safe? Is the next radar signal a surveillance aircraft? A drone? A missile? A warning? That uncertainty changes decisions. And decisions are the foundation of modern warfare. The recent escalation around Iran demonstrates this new kind of battlefield. After periods of military exchanges, both sides moved through a cycle of strikes and retaliation. American forces targeted Iranian military infrastructure, including missile-related sites, drone capabilities, logistics networks, and coastal surveillance systems. Iran responded with missile and drone attacks against American linked positions and regional partners. On the surface, this looks like a familiar military exchange. One side attacks, the other side responds. Weapons meet weapons. But the deeper story is more complicated, because every strike is also a message. Every missile launch is political communication. Every military operation is designed not only to damage equipment, but to influence decisions. And this changes everything. Because modern warfare is no longer only about destroying the enemy's physical capability. It is about changing what the enemy believes is possible. Consider the American military advantage. The United States has spent decades developing a system built around precision, intelligence, and overwhelming coordination. A modern American strike operation is not simply aircraft flying toward a target. It is a network. Satellites provide information. Surveillance aircraft build the picture. Command centers process intelligence. Aircraft, ships, and missiles operate together. The battlefield becomes connected. A target is not just located. It is understood. This is the foundation of American military power. The ability to see farther, decide faster, and strike more accurately than opponents. But here's the problem. The same technology that creates American advantage also creates new challenges. Because the more advanced a military system becomes, the more expensive it becomes, the more dependent it becomes on information, the more important its supply chains become, the more difficult it becomes to maintain that advantage during a long conflict. The question changes from, can the United States win a battle? To, can the United States sustain control over a complicated battlefield? This is where Iran's strategy becomes important. Iran cannot realistically compete with the United States in conventional military power. It does not possess comparable aircraft numbers. It does not have a global network of bases. It does not operate an navy designed to challenge American naval dominance worldwide. But asymmetric warfare changes the equation. A weaker opponent does not always try to become stronger. Sometimes it tries to make strength less useful. Iran has invested heavily in missiles, drones, coastal defense systems, naval capabilities, and networks designed to complicate operations near its own territory. The goal is not necessarily to defeat the world's strongest military in open combat. The goal is to make every action more costly, every operation slower, every decision harder. The battlefield becomes a calculation of risk. The importance of coastal surveillance reveals this clearly. A missile is not effective simply because it exists. A weapon needs information. It needs targeting. It needs communication. It needs a system that connects detection to action. That is why surveillance networks become such valuable targets. Destroying a radar site is not only about removing equipment. It is about reducing awareness, reducing reaction time, creating confusion. The lesson here is that modern warfare is increasingly about systems fighting systems, not just weapons fighting weapons. A missile versus a missile is only one part of the equation. The larger battle is sensor versus sensor, network versus network, decision-making versus decision-making. And this leads to the first major contradiction of the conflict. The United States can strike deep into Iranian military infrastructure. But here's the problem. Destroying military assets does not automatically remove strategic influence. A country can lose launchers and still maintain the ability to create uncertainty. It can lose equipment and still shape global attention. It can suffer damage and still force an opponent to spend enormous resources responding. This is why the Strait of Hormuz matters so much. Because it transforms military power into a complicated equation. A fighter aircraft can destroy a target. A missile can hit a facility. A ship can patrol a waterway. But none of those actions automatically answer the bigger strategic question. Who controls the future behavior of the battlefield? The historical record shows why this matters. During the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, the Persian Gulf became the center of what was known as the Tanker War. Commercial ships were attacked. Oil routes became contested. The United States eventually expanded naval operations to protect shipping. The lesson was clear. A narrow waterway can become a global strategic battlefield. Decades later, the technology has changed. Drones have replaced traditional threats. Precision missiles have become more advanced. Information networks now shape military decisions. But the fundamental problem remains. A small geographic choke point can create enormous strategic pressure. Today, the Strait of Hormuz represents a new kind of battlefield. One where military power, economics, and politics are impossible to separate. A missile launch can affect oil prices. An attack on shipping can influence international diplomacy. A military response can reshape alliances. Thousands of miles away, traders watch energy markets react in real time. Airlines calculate fuel costs. Governments evaluate economic risks. Military planners consider escalation. The battlefield extends far beyond the place where weapons are fired. And that creates the central mystery of this documentary. Everyone sees the missiles. Everyone sees the ships. Everyone sees the military confrontation. But what are they missing? Because the real battle may not be taking place inside the Strait of Hormuz. It may be taking place inside the minds of the leaders deciding what happens next. And that changes the entire meaning of this conflict. Everyone thinks this conflict is about missiles. They see ballistic launches lighting up the night sky. They see fighter aircraft crossing borders. They see naval vessels moving into position. They see explosions on satellite, images and headlines about strikes, retaliation, and de-escalation. But the real battle is not simply about who can destroy more targets. The real battle is about who can control the decisions of the other side. Because modern warfare is no longer only about destroying weapons. It is about creating uncertainty. It is about forcing an opponent to spend more money, move more forces, protect more locations, and make choices under pressure. And this is where the Strait of Hormuz becomes more than a piece of geography. It becomes the central character of the entire conflict. A narrow waterway, a few dozen miles wide, a place where energy, military power, and global politics collide. The world sees a shipping route. Strategists see a pressure point. And that difference changes everything. Because the question facing the United States is not simply, can it strike Iranian targets? The answer to that question may be yes. The United States has some of the most advanced aircraft, intelligence networks, naval forces, and precision weapons ever created. The harder question is, can military power create lasting control in a battlefield designed around uncertainty? That is a much more difficult problem. And this is the hidden lesson behind the Strait of Hormuz. The strongest military in the world can destroy launch sites. It can target command centers. It can disrupt infrastructure. But controlling human decisions, political calculations, and economic pressure is something completely different. And that is the battlefield that exists beneath the visible war. Look at the Strait of Hormuz from above. From a satellite image, it does not look like the center of a global confrontation. It appears as a thin blue passage between Iran and Oman. A narrow corridor surrounded by coastline, ports, and military installations. But every day, through that narrow passage, enormous amounts of energy move. Oil tankers, natural gas shipments, commercial vessels, the movement of the global economy. This creates the first major contradiction. The Strait of Hormuz is geographically small, but strategically enormous. A country does not need to dominate the entire ocean to create global pressure. It only needs the ability to threaten a critical point. This is one of the oldest principles of warfare. Control the choke point. Control the movement. Control the decision-making of everyone who depends on it. The same logic existed with ancient trade routes. It existed with naval empires. And today, it exists with energy networks. The battlefield has changed. The principle has not. But here's the problem. The United States is designed to fight large military problems. Carrier groups, air defense networks, advanced aircraft, long-range precision strikes. The entire American military system is built around overwhelming capability. But Iran's strategy is different. Instead of trying to match American power weapon for weapon, Iran has historically relied on creating costs. Missiles, drones, naval harassment, proxy forces, geographic pressure. The goal is not necessarily to defeat a stronger opponent in a traditional battlefield. The goal is to make victory expensive. And this changes the equation, because a military can win every individual engagement and still face a strategic challenge. A missile site can be destroyed, but another one can be hidden. A drone factory can be targeted, but production can continue somewhere else. A radar station can be damaged, but the need for constant surveillance remains. The deeper conflict becomes a battle of endurance. The part most people miss is that modern warfare is becoming a contest between expensive systems and affordable threats. A fighter aircraft may cost tens of millions of dollars. A missile defense interceptor may cost millions. A naval vessel may represent decades of engineering, training, and investment. But the threat coming toward it may be far cheaper. A drone, a small missile, a modified commercial system, a weapon designed not to overpower the enemy, but to create enough uncertainty that the enemy must constantly respond. This is one of the biggest strategic changes of the 21st century. Technology has made destruction more precise, but it has also made disruption cheaper. And that creates a dangerous imbalance, because defense is often more expensive than offense. A defender must protect every possible target. An attacker only needs one successful opportunity. That is why drones have become such a major symbol of modern warfare. They represent a fundamental question. What happens when precision becomes affordable? Inside a modern command center, the battlefield looks completely different from the images shown on television. There are no tanks moving across open fields. No soldiers charging across a battlefield. Instead, there are screens, radar displays, satellite images, data streams, operators watching thousands of pieces of information at once. The modern military advantage is increasingly about seeing first, understanding first, deciding first. The weapon is only one part of the system. The information behind the weapon may matter even more. And this is why attacks on radar sites, communication networks, and command centers are so important. Because a military without information becomes slower. And, in modern warfare, speed creates power. A missile that arrives first. A decision made seconds earlier. A warning received before impact. These moments can determine the outcome. The real weapon is often not the missile itself. The real weapon is the uncertainty it creates before the missile ever arrives. Strategically, this changes the way we should understand the conflict. The United States and Iran are not only fighting over territory, they are competing over perception. Each side wants the other side to believe something. Washington wants Iran to believe that continued escalation will create unacceptable costs. Tehran wants Washington and its allies to believe that pressure will also create unacceptable risks. This is why military actions are often messages. A strike is not only about the target destroyed, it is also about the signal sent. A naval deployment sends a message. An air defense activation sends a message. A missile launch sends a message. The battlefield becomes a communication system. Every action tells the other side something. The problem is that messages can be misunderstood. And that is where escalation becomes dangerous. Because here's the biggest contradiction. The same technology that makes modern warfare more precise can also make conflict harder to control. More sensors mean more information. More information means more opportunities to detect threats. But more detection also creates more pressure to respond quickly. A commander who waits too long may lose an advantage. A commander who reacts too quickly may escalate unnecessarily. The speed of modern warfare can become its greatest danger. A decision that once took days may now take minutes. A political crisis can become a military crisis before diplomats have time to react. And this is why the Strait of Hormuz remains so dangerous. Not because it is the largest battlefield, but because it connects so many systems at once. Energy, military power, trade, politics, global confidence. The bigger picture is that this conflict represents a much larger transformation happening around the world. For decades, military power was measured by platforms. How many aircraft carriers? How many fighter jets? How many missiles? How many tanks? Those numbers still matter, but they are no longer enough. The future battlefield may be decided by something harder to measure. Industrial capacity, software, supply chains, manufacturing speed, artificial intelligence, electronic warfare, the ability to replace losses, the ability to adapt faster than an opponent. The war in Ukraine has already shown this trend. Cheap drones have challenged expensive armored vehicles. Mass production has challenged technological superiority. Industrial endurance has returned as a major factor in warfare. The conflict around Iran reveals the same lesson from a different angle. Power is no longer only about what a country can build. It is about what a country can sustain. And this creates another contradiction. The most advanced military systems in the world provide enormous advantages. But those advantages create dependence. A highly sophisticated force requires complex logistics, specialized parts, advanced maintenance, secure communications, a constant supply chain. The more advanced the system becomes, the more important the invisible infrastructure behind it becomes. A fighter aircraft is not just an aircraft. It is pilots, maintenance crews, fuel, data networks, weapons production, intelligence support. The machine is only the visible part. The system behind the machine is the true capability. And this may be the biggest lesson from the Strait of Hormuz. The future of warfare will not only belong to the country with the strongest weapon, it may belong to the country with the strongest system. So when we look back at this conflict years from now, historians may not focus only on the missiles fired. They may look at something deeper. They may ask whether this was another moment when the world realized that military power was changing. Because the battlefield is expanding, a naval confrontation can affect energy markets. A drone attack can influence global trade. A regional conflict can affect airline routes thousands of miles away. The boundaries between military power and economic power are disappearing. A country does not need to invade another country to create global consequences. It only needs to create enough uncertainty. And that brings us back to the hero of this story, the Strait of Hormuz. A narrow passage of water, a place most people would never notice on a map. Yet it sits at the intersection of some of the most important forces on Earth: military strategy, energy security, global commerce, geopolitical competition. The strait represents a new kind of battlefield, one where geography still matters. But technology changes how geography is used. Where weapons matter, but information matters more. Where victory is not always defined by destruction, but by influence. The question is no longer whether the United States has the ability to strike. It clearly has extraordinary military capability. The real question is whether military superiority alone can control a battlefield where uncertainty itself has become a weapon. Because the future of warfare may not belong only to the side with the strongest aircraft, the largest navy, or the most advanced missiles. It may belong to the side that can adapt faster, think faster, produce faster, and force the enemy to make harder decisions. So the question for the future is this: do you believe future wars will be won by the countries with the most powerful weapons, or by the countries with the most resilient systems? Because in the next generation of conflict, the decisive battle may not happen in the sky, on the ocean, or on the ground. It may happen inside the invisible networks that connect the entire world.